I'm Kyle Blood with Wild North Kennel. At our kennel, we focus on the development of wild bird dogs. In this video, I'm going to be taking you through the 7 stages that we've identified that a bird dog goes through in their development, from unaware, puppy, or just dog that doesn't have any experience to really a seasoned bird finder. The reason I'm making this video is really for my past self. I had a lot of frustrations as I was going through the development of my very first dog, not really understanding the steps and stages that they have to go through. And so if I can help just one person feel a little bit better about what they're seeing from their dog and realize that it's a progression that every dog has to go through, and they don't just go from not knowing what a bird is to pointing every single one of them, that'll be completely my goal for this. So let's get started. The first thing, every dog starts in the same spot, whether it's a puppy or a dog that just doesn't have any experience yet. And we'll call this the unaware bucket. So the first thing that they all have to start with is they have to learn the cover that they're going to hunt, and they have to learn birds. So they have to learn the cover, which means we have to actually get them out in the type of cover that they're going to be hunting. For us, that's the grouse woods. So we take out dogs and we just run them through the woods. Let them explore, let them find things, let them just learn to maneuver that cover. At the same time, we're usually doing work out in a controlled environment with quail or pigeons or something like that to introduce them to feathers and birds in general. So they're learning the cover, they're learning birds in a controlled environment, and as they get more and more proficient at actually moving through whatever cover it is, they get to the step where they have to learn that birds live in the woods, or for us it's the woods. So they have to learn birds live in woods. And this doesn't just happen. There's no way to cheat this. I've heard some theories of you can go and plant a pigeon in the woods and you'll get the dog to start hunting the woods. I don't actually like that, because they have to not only learn that birds live in the woods, but they have to learn where they live in the woods. It's not enough to just go out and find birds. They have to learn to seek out the type of cover that birds live in. And the only way they can do that is by finding birds. So what you'll see typically is as these dogs get more proficient moving through the type of cover, eventually they're just going to bump into one. If they cover enough and you're going out enough, they're going to start bumping into them. And because they've learned that birds are the greatest thing in the world through that exposure process, they're going to try to start seeking out more and more of those experiences. So they know the cover, they love birds, and they just start bumping into them. And that's how they go from a dog that is completely unaware that birds live in the woods to a dog that's actively looking for birds. And so that's really the second stage, I would call it, of what a bird dog goes through developmental wise, is they go from unaware to actively looking. So once they know birds live in the woods, every time you take them out is like Christmas morning for them. They go out, they're looking for birds, and they're learning where they are in the woods. So they're working really hard, and they're starting to put themselves in good situations to find birds. So once you get them actively looking, the first thing that you're going to observe them doing is, I'm going to call it, they're going to be behind the bird. And what that looks like is a dog, you'll see them start to get birdie, they'll get scent, and they'll be moving really slow along. And then that bird is going to flush out in front of them, and they're not even going to know what happened. They're not going to see the bird flush, they're not going to hear it, they're not going to chase it, they're not going to do any of that because they're so enthralled with the scent that they're actually working. So we call that being behind the bird. They're actively looking, they're locating them, but they're so far behind what that bird is actually doing that they don't even know they flush it. The next part that they'll start going through is they're going to be a little bit faster moving through that scent, and they're going to be more engaged with the bird. And so they're going to start flushing and chasing. And this is where I started to get really frustrated personally, is I saw my dog flushing all these birds and not pointing them. What I didn't understand was that was him learning how to actually find birds and just where they live. It's a really, really important step. If you listen to some of the really old famous trainers like Shelley, he talks about some of his best dogs ever flushing birds well past 1-2 years old, because that was a dog that really got in there and learned everything about that bird. So this is where I started to get really frustrated, was like, why isn't my dog pointing? This is just a stage in their development. Some dogs will point earlier, some will point later, but I would argue that just about every dog with a lot of bird drive, the first few birds that it's really engaged with in the woods, it's probably going to chase, and that's okay. I actually really like to see dogs that have a lot of that in them, because that's a dog that's really getting in there and learning the cover and learning the bird really well. So the next thing that happens is they're getting really proficient, they're finding them, they're chasing them, they're doing all that. What you're going to start seeing is they're going to start flash pointing. And what is flash pointing? Flash pointing is where they're coming up, they're birdie, and they stop for just a moment, and then the bird flushes. That is them recognizing that the bird is there and that they have the scent cone. That is a crazy important step in their development. They didn't actually beat the bird, right? The bird still beat them because it flushed. They weren't able to hold it. They weren't able to do any of that. But they showed you that they had the scent cone prior to the bird flushing. Really, really fun when you start seeing dogs do this, because you know they're putting the pieces together really, really well. All right, the next thing that they'll do is they're going to point, hold it, and then flush it. So this is where that flash point starts getting a little bit longer, a little bit longer, a little bit longer, and they're holding it, and then they're making an active choice to go and flush that bird. Now, not all dogs do this. There are plenty that learn that they don't have to flush it, and maybe they've flushed enough of them where they've learned that if they hold it, they'll get it shot for them. This isn't necessarily something that a dog does forever, but we've seen lots of them go from flash pointing to pointing and holding and then choosing to flush. This is the stage for us where we know that dog understands the birds, it understands where they live, it understands how to find them, it understands how close they can get, and it's actually beating the bird. So this is the step that it's like, okay, this dog is ready for formal obedience training. So we put in some formal obedience training, and then you get finally to the point and hold. This is where you start killing a lot of birds over your dog. This is where it gets really, really, really fun. This is where we put in the obedience. When we're seeing that they're pointing, holding, choosing to flush, all it takes is a little bit of training to just get them to point and hold till we actually get shots at the bird. It's right here. That's a terrible arrow. This is where we train them. That's the only place that we're putting the formal obedience in them. It's really just to help them to get from here to here. Dogs will eventually go from here to here themselves, but this definitely helps, and it gives you a way to enforce it and things like that. But this is the stages that they go through. So if you're in a spot where you get a dog flushing and chasing birds, that's okay. Like that, you're just on the journey with them. Another really cool thing that happens as you're going through this process, and I'll illustrate it kind of with my first experience with developing a dog, is when we would first go out in the woods, I would probably flush, 2 to 1 birds that my puppy was flushing. And he was behind them a lot, or he was flushing them and chasing them. He was really in that early stages. But I was probably flushing 2 to 1. And as we went more and more and he got more and more exposure, all of a sudden we were flushing the same number. And I'm just walking through the woods, right? He's actually out looking. So we're probably flushing the same number. And then a little bit later, he's flushing 2 to my 1. And then pretty soon he's flushing all of them and I'm not flushing any anymore. And what that really was that was him getting more and more proficient at actually knowing where the bird lived and finding them and using the wind before I ever got to them. So as they're going through these stages of learning to point the bird, they're also going through a big development process of really learning to find where the birds live as well. It's also worth noting this isn't like a linear thing. It's not like your dog is behind all the birds and then they start flushing all of them and then they start flash pointing all of them. It goes up and down this line the whole time. So right away they're going to be mostly behind, but they might flush one and chase it during the day. Or they're going to be flushing and chasing, but maybe they flash point one really quick. And it goes up and down this list. What we're really looking for is where are they doing the majority of their work. So are they flushing and chasing most of them and flash pointing a couple? Because in a week or so, they might be flash pointing most of them and only chasing 1 or 2. Or do they start pointing and holding for a couple seconds? Or are they pointing and holding for 30, 40 seconds and then choosing to flush? So it's a scale. It's not just binary where they're at one step, but keeping an eye on where they are gives you a really good indication of where they are in their development as well, and gives you something to look for to kind of understand what they're doing. These are the stages that we've experienced dogs go through. It's made it a lot easier and a lot more fun to go out and actually develop dogs because we can tell where they are and we get to see improvement every single night. So appreciate you watching the video. Hope this helped. We did a couple other ones along the lines of just choosing a bird dog, but been really excited to make this one to really help illustrate how the actual development process happens. So appreciate you watching.